What would you do if the family that wronged you your entire life called you an ungrateful brat? In today's story, my choice was a masterclass in how to handle it. I systematically dismantled my father's life, taking his house, his savings, his reputation, and his standing in our family. It cost him everything. And it all started with that single, foolish insult. This whole thing happened a year ago. But the repercussions are still happening. And I hope they continue until the day the bastard dies. Growing up, my sister Lean and I had no love for our father, Tuan, whatsoever. I won't bore you with all the details. But alcoholic, abusive, and violent are the first words that come to mind. We were 10 years apart. So when Lean got accepted into a much better high school far from our town, she moved immediately and rarely visited. I was only 4 at the time. For years, I resented her for leaving me to deal with his nonsense all by myself. But now I understand better. And we're on good terms. Our town was supported almost entirely by a single local factory. Virtually everyone worked there. So everyone knew each other. My parents did too. But then it was purchased by the Defense Ministry. And they decided to cut off anyone without at least a high school degree. My mother was let go, which happened just 4 months after she'd had me. My father, Tuan, however, made it all the way to retirement and was granted military status. This was a huge deal. They gave him an honorable rank so his pension would almost double. But it came with a condition: you had to act accordingly. Because you were essentially military personnel now. My childhood was an absolute nightmare. So needless to say, I turned out to be a mess. Anger management issues and mental instability are the worst of it. And I'm still working on them. The moment I turned 18, I enlisted in the military. It had 2 major benefits: it didn't cost money. And I could finally leave home with no obligation to ever return. For me, it was a highway out of hell. 3 years later, I got an honorable discharge. It turned out I had actual mental problems. Who would have known? I received a bulk load of money from my service and even more in the following months as my military insurance was processed. I came home to find my town just as underwhelming as I remembered. And my father hadn't changed one bit. Not wanting to spend the rest of my life in that hellhole, I took what I could and moved to the city where my sister, Lean, was living. The last words dear old Dad said to me were, "You'd never make it." Because apparently, being discharged for mental illness meant I was a coward. I also think he hated that I was no longer the obedient little boy he could control. In the few weeks I was back, I stood up for myself more than I had in the first 18 years of my life. I started fresh in the new city, taking a blue-collar job to take advantage of the physique I'd built in the military, and started studying for a career in IT, all while taking care of my mental health. It was sometime during this period that it all started. My father, Tuan, was diagnosed with cancer. I was told it wasn't a life-threatening type, but operations were required. A few years prior, my sister had reconciled with him, partly because of my mother's wishes, and would occasionally bring my niece to visit. Lean was quite successful by then, so she decided to pay for the whole thing. Operations, treatments, hospital stays, recovery, it was all on her. She did this while moving into a new house and buying her first car, which are incredibly expensive in my country. Meanwhile, Tuan had a huge bank account from his pension but didn't have to spend a single penny. After about a year, He was in recovery. And things seemed okay. During this time, I was struggling. Living paycheck to paycheck while working and studying. And had to rely on a social program for my mental health treatment. I visited him after every operation. Though our reunions were never tearful. As long as he didn't provoke me, I was fine. After nearly a year of staying at my sister's house to recover, my father and mother finally headed home. A few months later, I got a frantic call from my sister. She had taken my niece to visit our parents to share the happy news that she was 3 months pregnant. But what should have been a joyful union turned into an absolute disaster. Apparently, my father had left his phone unattended for a few minutes. And his mistress sent him a very explicit picture, which my mom saw pop up on the screen. All hell broke loose. Lean said it was the first time in years she'd heard our mother scream bloody murder at our father. When he moved to hit her, my sister, despite being pregnant, threw herself in between them. Her husband then jumped in to protect her. It ended in a tear-filled, hours-long screaming match before my sister and her husband drove back to the city. The only good thing to come out of it was that in the chaos, my mother managed to grab his phone. We begged my mother to get a divorce. But she was a submissive, traditional housewife who thought divorce was a fate worse than death. They had been together for almost 35 years. And I think a part of her still hoped he would change. Since she didn't want it, we dropped it and decided to just cut him out of our lives for good. Then, about 6 months later, my father's side of the family started calling me. My aunt, Deep, my grandmother, even Tuan himself, all calling within a day. They were suddenly sickly sweet, trying to convince me to come visit. It was obviously a ruse. After the incident with the phone, his entire family had blamed my mother, saying she should have just kept it a secret for the family's sake. They disavowed me and Lean, calling us ungrateful brats because we wouldn't accept their final argument, "He's your father." After all, this was their fatal mistake. In their arrogance, they handed a man who had already been through hell the very justification he needed to bring that hell to their doorstep. Out of morbid curiosity, I drove back alone to see what they wanted. It turned out they wanted to sell his house, which was built on my grandmother's land. Here's the kicker: back when Tuan was about to undergo his first operation, he had transferred the house into my name. In my country, inheriting property is a legal nightmare. So this was to avoid complications if he died. Out of convenience, we had also convinced my grandmother to give me the land title. Tuan made this move out of convenience. A simple signature to avoid a legal headache. He had no way of knowing that with that pen stroke, he wasn't just signing over a property. He was signing away his entire future. I told them I'd think about it, faked an emergency, and left immediately. A plan began to form on the long drive back. And for the first time in a long while, I actually cracked a smile. I went straight to my sister's, where my mom was now staying, and laid it all out. After a year in the city, my mom was more open-minded. And it only took a little convincing for her to agree. My sister contacted a lawyer to review our options. It was simple, since the house and land were legally in my name. My father had no claim. Any paperwork without my signature was useless. I then asked the lawyer what would happen if my mother filed for divorce. He said the court would be unlikely to award her the full claim unless we could prove Tuan was unfaithful before their separation. To his surprise, I told him we could. Remember that phone my mother grabbed? It was smashed during the fight but was still in one piece. My mom had asked me to throw it away, but my lazy ass just tossed it in my loft. It provided more than enough proof of his indecency. With our strategy set, I called my father and told him I would come home the next month to make an announcement. When I arrived, they were all smiles and kindness. But the moment I introduced my lawyer, it was like a switch flipped. They became vile and hostile. I presented Tuan with two options: relinquish any and all claims to the house, or be served with a lawsuit for marital violations, which in my country carries a sentence of 6 months probation to 2 years in prison. After a tantrum of screaming and name-calling, he kicked us out. He had chosen the lawsuit. At the first hearing, he just launched into a screaming tirade, making up all sorts of lies about my mother. The officer in charge was clearly his buddy, telling us the case wasn't a priority and that we should settle it out of court. My lawyer politely declined and told Tuan to expect another hearing under much less friendly circumstances. In between, he tried to pressure us by calling all our relatives, telling them my mother was a bitch and I was an ungrateful brat. Very few took his side. At the second hearing, faced with the undeniable, explicit evidence from his phone, he finally cracked. I watched his bluster fade, his face pale as he realized there was no escape. With a defeated slump of his shoulders, he agreed to all my terms. He would relinquish any claim to the house and divorce my mom. The house now belonged solely to my mother and me. I agreed to let him live there for the rest of his life. But him alone, not his mistress. But this was just the beginning. As one person later commented online after hearing my story, this revenge was served ice cold. First, my sister gathered every single receipt from his cancer treatment. The final sum was staggering. We then took him to small claims court and billed him for it. Now, suing your parents for medical care is highly unethical in my country. But we had thrown ethics out the window long ago. The process took almost a year and 3 hearings. But our claim was finally rewarded. The court sent a bailiff to collect. When Tuan failed to comply, she sent in the police to start seizing assets. I can only imagine his rage as they carried out the expensive wooden furniture, the 27-inch smart TV, the fridge, and his prized reclining massage chair, all of which had been bought by my sister. He was forced to pay out of his own pocket to stop them from seizing everything he owned. The final amount cost him 70% of his life savings. It was never about the money. It was about being petty. Next, I filed a report with the factory that managed his pension. Remember that honorable military status and doubled pension? It was conditional on behaving accordingly. I provided them with a detailed folder, complete with the graphic pictures from his phone. They immediately held a hearing, and he was stripped of his rank. His pension was cut by nearly half. My mother was overjoyed. It was all she talked about for a month. I thought I was done. But then my aunt, Deep, showed up at my sister's door to scream at her and her young children. She was furious because she had been hoping to leech money from Tuan's house sale or his savings, neither of which existed anymore. Screaming at my niece and nephew crossed a line. I was seeing blood. I did some digging and learned Deep was drowning in debt. I also knew from my mother's gossip circle that she always told her creditors she was struggling. So, I created a throwaway Facebook account and sent her a friend request, which she, an elderly person who accepts any request, immediately approved. Her entire profile was a shrine to wealth she didn't have, showing off vacations, new clothes, and expensive meals. I simply screenshotted everything and sent it to every single person she owed money to. For the next month, she wasn't threatened with lawsuits. She was harassed by thugs who threw paint, fish sauce, and sometimes literal shit at her door. She eventually had to sell her house to pay off her debts. The final act of revenge, however, was the most profound. In my father's traditional family, there is a head who holds a certain authority. A mantle passed from grandfather to father to son. Every year, there is a large family ceremony to pay tribute to our ancestors. My father tried to hide the date from us, but he severely underestimated my mother's intelligence network. My mother, my sister's family, and I all made the long trip, timing our arrival 2 days before Tuan. This side of the family had only ever heard his sanitized version of the story. We let my mother loose, and she masterfully recounted every detail of his betrayal and cruelty. By the time Tuan arrived with my aunt and grandmother, the entire family knew what a monster he was. The look on his face when he saw us already there was priceless. He was met with stony silence and stink eyes, forced to sit alone like a sad dog. This was the moment the power structure of a generation crumbled. At the suggestion of my uncle, son, the elders agreed that I should take up the mantle as the head of our family branch. It wasn't just about a title. It was about the public transfer of honor from a disgraced father to the son he had wronged. A final, undeniable verdict delivered by the family itself. The best part was the celebratory party. Seating is based on hierarchy. As the new head, I sat at the main table. My father, Tuan, was relegated to a regular table in the back, seated with my disgraced aunt and a bunch of snarky widows who, I was told, did not hold back their comments. My father is now just a miserable old man. His mistress left him, likely because the money was gone. He lives alone in that house with next to nothing. Last I heard, his cancer has returned. And this time, my sister won't be paying for it. He has tried to contact my mother to make amends, but we've blocked him on everything. Some might look back and call what I did nuclear revenge. Honestly, I wouldn't disagree. All of this could have been avoided if he had just acted in good faith. But he chose to scream and punch his way through life. I simply acted in response. Ultimately, this story is a stark reminder that respect is earned, not owed. And that treating your family with cruelty and deceit can lead you to a lonely end with nothing but the consequences of your own actions. What do you think is the line between justice and revenge? And did I cross it? Let me know in the comments.